Okay, so tonight I'm going to take up an article. I might have to do this in a couple sections because this is a lot of material and it's very charged. So the use of electricity on Shabbat and Yom Tov. This is from the Journal of Halacha and Contemporary Society, spring 1991. Hopefully the link where I got this is still available. Hopefully I can get this article up as a link in the description. So I'll have to see. But I have this article. If you want me to scan it, if I can't get it up, let me know. So I do want to say from the start, this is not an article of reform or conservative ideas. This is an article that's pulling from respected Orthodox or Ultra-Orthodox poskim. So this isn't like, this isn't some reform or conservative opinion. And I do want to say I hold to the accepted practice of not using electricity on Shabbat. But I also think that it is good for people to understand the halachic mind and to also start to familiarize themselves with the halachic terminology. And to understand that the world is not, that halacha is not like this like, like here it is, boom. It's an understanding of your world, and you have to understand how all of this fits into a Torah perspective. And this is a perfect example. Electricity is a perfect example because there's also two facets of halacha. There's a biblical prohibition and there's a rabbinic prohibition. And they each have different, categories of how you can deal with them too. Because if you're up against something that would create a loss, like if you have a business and your business has to have equipment that runs, you start it, but it runs and it operates, or some sort of process that operates over Shabbat. Like, how do you deal with that? And the Talmud actually has examples of this on both sides of this idea of like, you can let it operate and you can let it operate. So we're going to get into this, and hopefully we can start to educate a little bit on the halachic mind. So I've had this article for a long time. I love going back to it. But anyway, preface. The topic of electricity and halacha is unique to our generation, since there are no direct precedents in the Talmud or Rishonim, and the halachic discussion of this topic has been ongoing for less than 100 years. So I think at this point it's probably been 100 years or a little over. It is only since the technology developed and appliances became electrically powered that many of these questions arose. Over time, many works were printed, and it has become an established part of rabbinic culture. This is Electricity from the Encyclopedia Talmudit, 18642. And I do want to point out, like, even in today's world, like a long time ago, even like a couple decades ago, it wasn't common for people to have like solar panels, or it wasn't, where you disconnected from the power grid, or, you have certain types of lights. I mean, we have a whole bunch of different types of technology now where, stuff is fully automated. There are, they pretty much did away with traditional incandescent bulbs. If you go to your refrigerator and open up the door, like, there's no way, in a lot of cases with new stuff, there's no way that there's a incandescent bulb in there. It's probably some LED or something else in there. There's all types of new technology coming out all the time. A lot of the stuff that we use, it's actually millivolts. Well, I wouldn't say millivolt. It depends on what kind of stuff you're talking about, but a lot of circuits and stuff, it's low current, low voltage, low power consumption, but it's solid state where it's on all the time. There's all kinds of different things that are going on. We have different types of motors that they had in the past. So some of these discussions, they vary on all kinds of different appliances and electrical components. So here we go. Introduction. The advances of technology have posed practical challenge to decisors throughout the ages. One of the hallmarks of Jewish law is its ability and desire to assimilate technological advances into the practices of observant Jews. The application of ancient and venerated principles of halacha to new situations has been and remains one of the essential tasks of modern decisors of Jewish law. In the last 100 years, this task has become considerably more difficult due to the rapid and frequent changes in the state of technology. So I do want to point out the word for electricity in Hebrew is hashmal. So this is the same word that's used in the book of Ezekiel for like the divine chariot, and there's like this hashmal. That's the word that we use. And also you have to understand the time period of some of these poskim, and you have to understand what they actually saw in their day. So if we remember the history of electricity, the reason why we have the word electrocution is because people used to have like DC power coming into their house, which was a lot more dangerous, and people's houses burned out. So there was a danger associated with that until we went to, AC that's in homes now. And then from there, we had wiring systems and fuses and stuff like before. Like, I don't even know, maybe at the beginning they didn't even have fuses maybe. Whereas like the wiring and stuff in homes a long time ago was quite different, and it was still dangerous where stuff could burn. So there was a different time period where like residential electricity was completely different than what we have today. And we have to also note that whenever they took into consideration some of this stuff. So this article surveys halacha's response to one of the technological breakthroughs of the last 150 years, the invention of electricity, or I should say the discovery. In particular, it explores halacha's understanding of the use of electricity on Shabbat and Yom Tov within the rubric of prohibited work, malacha. So I do want to point out, do you see anything through the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, the Chumash, and the Talmud, the Mishnah, and anything else about stuff that would have dealt with like static electricity or anything related to that? And that is something to keep in mind, the absence of someone talking about that, because like in the tabernacle, they had wool and linen, you had stuff that was definitely going to make static charges. So, was there prohibitions with certain things back then? And we don't really see that. So we also have to keep that in mind, because this is a very delicate thing, because we didn't have an understanding of electricity very well until recent times here, because your body is electrochemical. And like, as you walk through space, you're actually causing electrical currents and things on a very low voltage, low current level. So you have to ask, if you're talking about the current of something, like what is the threshold that all of a sudden it becomes, prohibited or whatnot? Like if you walk outside, the earth is more or less a battery. And when you walk outside, and the atmosphere is a capacitor. It's like the whole earth system is a capacitor and a battery. So when you walk outside, when you walk on the ground, you're creating electrical currents. So the question is, at what point? So just keep that kind of stuff in mind. So continuing. So this is one of the first notes, and I think the notes are very important. So a number of issues are not addressed in this article. In particular, it does not address the use of Shabbat of electricity generated in violation of halacha by Jews. This article is of pressing importance, but only in Israel. So too, meaning the use on Shabbat of electricity generated by Jews. So if the power company is run by Jewish people on Shabbat. So if you know that the electrical workers at the power company that have to be there run on Shabbat. So that's a completely different issue, and it's a very important issue, but only related to Israel. So too, this article does not reflect the considerable debate among the authorities whether an action done with an electrical appliance is considered as if it was done directly by the one who turned on the appliance, right? This would, for example, be relevant in determining whether matzah made by a machine could be used for the Seder, since the matzah must be made specifically for consumption at a Seder. For a discussion of the use of electricity for Shabbat, Hanukkah, and Havdalah candles, see this other article, Contemporary Halachic Problems. Okay, continuing. The technological revolution caused by the widespread use of electrical appliances has led to a great discussion and debate within halachic circles. Thousands of monograms, responsa, and books have been written by halachic authorities in the preceding decades relating to the use of electricity on Shabbat and Yom Tov. A number of works survey this topic thoroughly in Hebrew and should be referred to for further analysis on the many issues discussed. And there's a whole bunch in this this note here. Okay, so this article is divided into 5 sections. The first discusses the basis for the prohibition of turning on and off incandescent lights on Shabbat. The second addresses the use of electricity where no light and heat is produced, turning on a fan, etc. The third discusses the difference between Shabbat and Yom Tov for the purposes of the rules developed in sections 1 and 2. The fourth analyzes various specific appliances in light of the rules developed, and the fifth discusses various issues relating to the use of timers to control appliances on Shabbat and Yom Tov. Okay, so this is section 1 now. Incandescent lights on Shabbat. Turning on incandescent lights during Shabbat. One of the earliest issues involving electricity found in halachic literature was the permissibility of turning on an incandescent light on Shabbat. So note 3 says, an incandescent light generates light by causing an electrical current to flow through a metal filament. The resistance to current flow generates light and heat. And it can be hot, but it is contained within the bulb. But it's the metal heating up, okay? So that's the important part there. The overwhelming majority of the decisors maintain, for reasons to be explained, that turning on an incandescent light on Shabbat violated a biblical prohibition. So it says Mishnah Shabbat 41a rules. One who heats a metal pot, literally a boiler, it says, may not pour cold water into it to heat it. However, one may pour water into the pot or a cup in order to temper it. The Talmud, Shabbat 41a and b, in discussing this Mishnah states, Rav says this Mishnah is only ruling that it is permitted to pour water into a heated pot when the water temperature is modified. But if the metal is hardened, it is prohibited to heat the metal. Shmuel says this is permitted even if hardening occurs. The Talmud replied, if the primary purpose of heating the metal is to harden the pot, nobody permits it heating. Okay, so too the Talmud in Yevamot 6b declares, Rabbi Sheshet rules that the cooking or burning of a wick of metal, just like the cooking of spices, is prohibited on Shabbat because of the biblical prohibition to cook on Shabbat. The Rambam codifies these rules in Shabbat 12:1 by recounting, one who heats a metal bar in order to temper it in water has violated the biblical prohibition of lighting a flame. The Ravad immediately disagrees as to the nature of the biblical prohibition and rules that heating a metal bar until it glows is prohibited because of either cooking, as the Ramban elsewhere appears to clarify it, Shabbat 9:6, or as makeh patish, completing a nearly finished process. Both authorities, however, agree that a biblical prohibition is violated when metal is heated until it glows. There's no biblical prohibition violated in generating light per se. So based on the position of Rambam, which most commentaries accept, so see Sha'ar Hatzion Orach Chaim 218.1, the overwhelming majority conclude that turning on an electric light on Shabbat, an action which heats a metal filament until it glows, violates the biblical prohibition of lighting a flame. So note 4, there's a whole bunch of references there. Okay. Some disagree, and based on the position of Ravad, maintain that while a biblical prohibition is violated, the prohibition is that of cooking, bishul, and not of lighting a flame. Yet a third position is found in the commentaries. These authorities limit the statement of the Talmud in the codes that it is prohibited to heat a metal bar until it glows to the case where the heating is done in order to affect the metal. In the case of the Rambam, to temper the iron. According to these authorities, there is no biblical prohibition intrinsic in the generation of light and heat. Rather, that action is only biblically prohibited when it is intended to affect the metal. The incidental heating of the metal in incandescent lights, because you don't intend to heat the metal, right? However, is an action not intended for its designed purpose. Malacha she'ena tzricha lagufa, because when one turns on a light, one does not intend to affect the metal in the filament. Thus, no biblical prohibition occurs. Even the authorities who follow this position concede, however, that a rabbinic prohibition is violated. So Rabbi Auerbach, and he's a very big name in this. He addresses this issue at great length and appears to demonstrate that these authorities are in error. He also states that even Ravad, who maintain that heating a metal constitutes cooking, would admit that causing a filament or heating an element to glow is an act of burning, so mavir. Okay, this third position has been categorically rejected by most decisors. In fact, in Teshuvot Dovev, Mesharim 187, Rabbi Weinfeld states that the position of those who rule that turning on lights is only a rabbinic violation should not even be taken into consideration by the decisors when rendering halachic decisions regarding matters of electricity. Rabbi David Zvi Hoffman, Melamed Lehol 149 states what has emerged as a consensus opinion. The verse Exodus 35:3 states, "One may not create a fire on Shabbat in all your dwellings." Describes the prohibition against creating fire of any sort. Current flowing through a filament and causing it to glow creates fire despite the absence of a flame, and regardless of whether that which is on fire is consumed. So one authority maintains that the biblical prohibition to creating a flame is always inapplicable to lighting an incandescent bulb because the prohibition only applies where the substance which is burning is consumed, per se. Shulchan Aruch Harav Orachaim 495-2. Okay. Rambam's assertion, Shabbat 12:1, that heating a metal is prohibited because of burning only proves this rule and was not intended to limit it. The consensus of opinion accepted by nearly all rabbinic authorities, but not all, is that turning on an incandescent electric light on Shabbat violates a biblical prohibition, although the precise prohibition is in dispute. And that's actually problematic because if you can't decide if you can't decide on what your the crime is, then you can't just have a jury that says, this guy's guilty, but they disagree on what he's guilty of. That doesn't help you. So this is already problematic right there, but it's basically the question is it a rabbinic prohibition or a biblical prohibition? So although the precise prohibition is in dispute, most authorities maintain the prohibition is lighting a flame, and a minority contends that the prohibition is either cooking or makeh bapatish, which is basically finishing a process. So but you have to consider what the majority takes into account. So you can't just throw it all out, right? So raising intensity of an incandescent light. This is part B. So raising the intensity of a light produced by an already glowing incandescent bulb. So let's say you have a bulb and you have a dimmer. That's what they're talking about. The dimmer is just changing the resistance on the circuit. So if it's already turned on and it's just dim, can you adjust it on Shabbat? So raising the intensity of a light produced by an already glowing incandescent bulb on Shabbat contains issues distinct from that of turning on the light. And in fact, a number of modern authorities appear to label this as only a rabbinic violation. Assuming that the prohibition is turning on the light is cooking or bishul, as the Ravad and others maintain, it is possible that raising the heat and light output of the light is analogous to reheating an item which is already cooked. The glowing light is similar to the cooked food. If that is not a biblical violation, the Chazon Ish disagrees, Orachaim 59, and states that since the additional heating increases the light production, it is not analogous to reheating a cooked item, and a biblical prohibition is violated. According to those authorities who locate the prohibition in turning on a light in burning, as most do, every increase in intensity would logically seem to be an additional violation. But it's not quantized. It's not like, where you're here, it goes up to this level. It's not quantized. So you can't just say that any increase would be a logical additional violation because, what is the quantity that is increased? So point 9, Rabbi Auerbach appears to argue with this too. He maintains that increasing current flow to a light is not similar to adding fuel, because it's actually reducing. So you have a full circuit, and it's just like a faucet. The faucet's on, but it's just allowing so much to go through or not. Just like if you have a flame, I don't know, what is a good example of this? Think of the exhaust on a flame. Like when you open the chute or close the chute, That's kind of like more or less what it would be, rather than adding fuel to it, because you're not really adding fuel. You're just controlling what can go out of it, or through. So that's just like the chute on a furnace, if you open it or close it, if you're familiar with that. Okay, so, and I do want to point out, because this wasn't exactly defined, but originally, Orthodox Jews, observant Jews, used electricity on Shabbat. It wasn't until the Chazon Ish so the Chazon Ish, and he's actually fairly early on here, he's the one that went on a campaign to stop the use of electricity on Shabbat. And some people say, I don't know. Some people say that he tried, like, that he wasn't just making a decision, that he actually tried to find a prohibition to stop the use of electricity on Shabbat, rather than, actually declare what it truly was, this is the prohibition, or this or this. Like, he tried to find a way to stop it, is what some people say. I don't know. He's not here to help us out on that one. But according to, let's see. So part C, turning off or dimming incandescent lights. So we dealt with increasing it. Now we're dimming it or turning it off. As we first pointed out, Rabbi David Tzvi Hoffman, Malamed Lehol Orach 49, in widely accepted sense, the turning off or dimming of an incandescent light on Shabbat is considered to be only a rabbinic violation. For reasons unclear to these authors, two authorities have taken a contrary position and ruled that a biblical violation occurs. And there's some citations there in the notes. But anyway, this is because, according to biblical law, d'oraita, the only time an action is prohibited on Shabbat is when the prohibited work is done for its direct consequences. Malacha shetzricha legufa, and that the prohibited result must occur. Okay, that's for a biblical prohibition. For example, if one were to pour water into another's field, intending only to dispose of water and not to irrigate the crops, the intended purpose of the biblical prohibition of water in a field, although the actions are physically identical to a prohibited biblical action, the intent of the person to wash his hands or otherwise, rather than irrigate the field, spares one from a biblical violation. So it says, see Chaye Adam, Shabbat 11:1 for that. The Talmud in Shabbat 44a, 42a, and 143a states that extinguishing a flame is biblically prohibited only when the person who is doing the extinguishing desires the product of the extinguished flame. So the ashes, the carbon, the soot, something like that, and not when one merely intends to remove the flame and have darkness. So that's a biblical prohibition, right? In all other instances, only a rabbinic violation is committed. Thus, turning off an electric light is certainly no worse than directly extinguishing a lit flame, no worse than, right? Which, if done to create darkness rather than to produce ashes, is only a rabbinic violation. So Tosafot states that this is a more serious rabbinic prohibition than the standard rabbinic prohibition on Shabbat. Okay. Rabbi Auerbach, and he's pretty much the champion for electricity, but he tried to correct a lot of these misconceptions. So Rabbi Auerbach argues that there is another reason turning off incandescent lights on Shabbat is not a biblical prohibition. He claims that turning off a light by turning off the switch is analogous to removing all the fuel from an oil lamp on Shabbat in manner which does not directly extinguish the flame. So if this is so, it would unquestionably be only a rabbinic violation to extinguish a flame on Shabbat. So, and then part D, non-incandescent lights. The use of non-incandescent lights, such as fluorescent or neon, which do not produce light by heating a strip of metal which glows, but rather an electrically excited gas to emit light, are not prohibited on Shabbat because of the prohibitions discussed in this section. Since these lights do not contain a filament that glows, they are halachically identical to an appliance and not a light, and thus will be discussed in part 2. So if you're not familiar with this, if you take a fluorescent bulb, like one of those tube bulbs, and you put it into a high frequency environment, it will light up. It doesn't have to be connected to anything. So that's the idea. Those type of lights are excited by like a high frequency electromagnetic field. They're not excited by like electricity running through wires. So that's a completely different thing, and they don't heat up like any other bulbs do. They're completely cool. I mean, there are some instances where it could get hot for a different type of reason, but the general basic idea is that it's going to stay cool. So notes 15. So 15, fluorescent lights generate light by exciting the gas, thereby causing light to be emitted. Virtually no heat is generated. There are older model fluorescent lights. The starter produced a small spark which started the fluorescent light. Modern fluorescent lights are lacking the starter and thus are not considered to be identical to incandescent lights. And as far as neon lights, like fluorescent lights, they generate light by electrically exciting gas. No flame is produced. So too, LE and LC displays have no filament. In fact, LCDs do not illuminate at all. Instead, when subjected to an electrical potential, LCDs darken and become visible. Halogen lights appear to be identical to incandescent lights, as a hot metal filament is the source of the light produced. Okay, so since these lights do not contain a filament that glows, they are halachically identical to an appliance and not a light, and that's discussed in part 2. There is not generic prohibition to create light on Shabbat. Rather, incandescent lights, because of the way they operate, happen to violate the prohibition to create a flame. So too, extinguishing fluorescent lights on Shabbat is not rabbinically prohibited as a form of extinguishing, since halacha does not recognize that there is a light to be turned off. For a complete analysis of these issues, see Rabbi Rosen. It is possible that extinguishing a fluorescent or neon bulb is prohibited because of marit ayin or chashad, because the casual observer might think that either incandescent lights may be extinguished or that the person who is doing the action is sinning. This would depend on whether the light produced by these systems appears similar to that produced by incandescent light. Frequently, it does not. But I mean, that's looking at it like you're not really supposed to do something that somebody else thinks that you did something else that's prohibited. But if it was the common practice, like today they've really wanted us to do away with incandescent lights in our homes. A lot of people have LEDs or fluorescents. So it would only be a misunderstanding. It would be an misunderstanding of even the technology if someone thought that. But aside from that, summary of part 1. The consensus of opinion is that turning on or raising the intensity of an incandescent light is biblically prohibited on Shabbat. Turning off or dimming such a light is rabbinically prohibited on Shabbat. Non-incandescent lights are not considered lights according to halacha. So that would, for those types, look further into this article. So this section deals only with the prohibition of lights, qua lights. I don't know what that's supposed to mean. Obviously, many of the issues addressed in part 2 are only relevant to this section as well. For example, if one were to conclude that turning a circuit on or off is biblically prohibited in all cases because of building, it would not matter practically whether extinguishing the light violates the prohibition of extinguishing. Mechabe. And they actually point to another article here, microwave ovens on Shabbat. No flame. It's heating, it's moving the water molecules, the microwave. I don't use a microwave. Anyway, so that's section 1. So section 2, using electrical appliances other than lights during Shabbat. Section 1 addressed the prohibitions associated with the use of electricity to generate heat and light. This section surveys the halachic issues involved in the use of electricity when there is no apparent generation of and no intent to create light and heat. Consensus of halachic opinion maintains that it is typically prohibited to turn on electrical appliances on Shabbat. However, a clear understanding has yet to emerge regarding why such a prohibition exists. Indeed, one eminent authority maintains that the use of electrical appliances is only prohibited because of tradition. 7 reasons have been advanced to prohibit the use of electrical appliances on Shabbat. One other reason was occasionally advanced by rabbinic authorities when electricity first became common. A number of authorities were of the opinion that the electrons in the wires were a form of flame that extended that flame, and that extending that flame was prohibited on Shabbat. But that doesn't really apply because that's not exactly what's going on. But anyway, number one, turning on an appliance is analogous to creating something new, so molid, which is prohibited on Shabbat. Number two, completion of a circuit is prohibited because it is a form of building, boneh. So you're not allowed to build on Shabbat. So, and then number three, turning on an appliance violates the prohibition of makeh bapatish, completing a product, right? So you're completing, if you're not just building, but you like the final completion of something. So number four, completion of a circuit must create sparks and therefore is prohibited because it creates a flame. That's not exactly the case today because of solid state, but these are reasons advanced. 5, the use of any electrical current leads to an increase in fuel consumption at the power station, which is prohibited. Not exactly, but we get to that. Number 6, heating of a metal transistor or wire, even when no visible light is emitted, is prohibited because of cooking or burning. So they're just saying because something heats up, that's cooking. But that also has to be classified because, there's a certain temperature that something can heat up before you're considered like cooking it, right? So these first 6 possible bases for prohibiting the use of electrical appliances on Shabbat divided into 2 groups. The first 4 relate to the completion of a circuit, which creates current to flow. The final 2 locate the source of prohibition in running and not turning on the appliance. If each of these prohibitions were to be found inapplicable, then only the following reason would remain. Number 7, the use of electricity without light or heat is actually permitted, but because observant Jews, since the invention of electricity, have maintained that it is prohibited to use electrical appliances on Shabbat, and rabbinic authorities approved of this stricture, it is prohibited to use such appliances absent great need because of tradition. I do take there is a problem with that statement because originally observant Jews did use electricity on Shabbat, and that's why the Chazon Ish had to go around and make his campaign. But so each of the 6 possibilities requires detailed analysis. This article will not evaluate the correctness of the stricture contained in the final reasoning, that electricity should not be used because tradition prohibits it, albeit incorrectly. As this reason involves considerations of halakha far beyond the scope of this article and involves the fundamental questions of the relationship between minchag, halakha, and common practice. See generally Rabbi Herschel Schechter, Is Canned Tuna Kosher? Journal of Halakha and Contemporary Society, 15.7, pages 8-9, 1988. So maybe we should check that out sometime. All right, 21. While it is beyond the scope of a survey article to convey the full force of the complete halachic dialogue among various authorities, an effort has been made to present, along with each opinion, some of the Talmudic proofs and some of the questions raised in opposition to each reason. So A, creating something new, so molid. So I'll read that again. So turning on an appliance is analogous to creating something new, which is prohibited on Shabbat. So the possibility that the use of electricity on Shabbat violates the prohibition of molid was first suggested by Rabbi Yitzhak Shmelkes in Beit Yitzhak 231. Rabbi Shmelkes states that just as the sages forbade creating a new fragrant scent in one's clothes on Shabbat, molid recha, Beitza 23a, an action which Rashi explains was prohibited because one who creates something new is almost as one who performs a biblically forbidden act. So too, they forbid creating anything new on Shabbat, including appliances made new through the use of electricity or the creation of a current flow. Thus, he states, creating a current flow, molid zeram, is biblically forbidden because in doing so, one has created something new, a functioning appliance. I think that's a very weak argument because obviously no one believes that you're buying an unfinished appliance from the store. Let's say it's a refrigerator, Nobody says that refrigerator is unfinished until you plug it in. No, I mean, it's a finished product. It's just, it's just being used or not being used, right? But this is an argument that's advanced. So Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, so he's the proponent of like getting correct thinking on this, and many others disagree with Rabbi Shmelchus' thesis. Essentially, these authorities state that Rabbi Shmelchus' theory must be wrong because any creative act which is routinely done and undone throughout the day cannot be included in the rabbinic prohibition of creating something new. Moreover, there are many examples of new creations which were not prohibited by the sages. Merely because creating a new fragrance is prohibited does not imply that all new creation is prohibited on Shabbat. Rabbi Auerbach insists that only a limited number of actions were prohibited in the Talmud because of Molid. And one may not extrapolate from these limited examples that creating anything else new, like electrical current, is rabbinically prohibited. Okay? So what he argues is that they're giving exceptions to the rule. So the Talmud is dealing with exceptions, which are molid, that are prohibited, and you can't use exceptions to blanket prohibit everything. So a proof to this can be found in a responsum of the Chacham Tzvi, number 92, which limits the prohibition of molid, or creating something new, to the appliance of a fragrance to one's clothes. However, he permits one to apply fragrance to many things other than clothes. In addition, Rabbi Auerbach in Minchat Shlomo, page 72, provides numerous examples of new creative actions which the rabbis never forbade. Okay, B, building, boneh. The second possible basis for prohibiting the use of electricity can be found in the first in the works of Rabbi Abraham Isaiah Karelitz, commonly referred to by the name of his magnum opus Chazon Ish. So he's the one that went around and tried the campaign to try to get this electricity forbidden. So he states that it is likely that completion of a live circuit constitutes a forbidden act of building, boneh, on Shabbat. He reasons that completing a circuit renders a previously useless wire into a functional wire. And this is analogous to completing a building or wall. In addition, completing a circuit is analogous to assembling an appliance composed of numerous parts, which halacha defines as building, and is thus prohibited on Shabbat. The Chazon Ish's position has aroused great debate among halachic scholars. The most vigorous and thorough critique of this position is found in the 11th chapter of Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach's work, Minchat Shlomo. Well, Rabbi Auerbach advances numerous critiques of the Chazon Ish's position. The most crucial aspect of his criticism is that opening a circuit which is designed to be opened and closed routinely cannot be considered an act of building or destroying. Closing a circuit is analogous to closing a door, an action which the halacha does not consider to be building, since the door is intended to be open and closed constantly. So I'm going to just check these notes real quick. Rabbi Auerbach points out that all the outstanding authorities who have discussed the issue of electricity prior to the Chazon Ish never even alluded to the possibility that the completion of a circuit is an act of building. See section 3. In addition, he states that there is no prohibition in transforming a dead or useless object into a live or useful object on Shabbat. Rabbi Moshe Tendler, in a lecture at Yeshiva University, has asserted that this argument appears to have convinced Rabbi Moshe Feinstein to reject the opinion of the Chazon Ish. Rabbi Feinstein's writings provide no precise definition of the prohibition one violates when using electricity, although he does not appear to have accepted the Chazon Ish's opinion. See Ergot Moshe, Orachaim 342, 150, 484, and 45. Okay. The overwhelming majority of halachic decisors appears to side with Rabbi Auerbach, as the Encyclopedia Talmudit 18166 states. From the writings of numerous achronim, it appears that the turning on an electrical circuit does not violate the prohibition of fixing an object, mitakein mana, and makeh bepatish, or building, boneh. The Encyclopedia Talmudit, in a footnote, collects the numerous authorities who reject the Chazon Ish's approach. So that'd be something to check out. Nevertheless, at the very least, halachic authorities do take into consideration the opinion of the Chazon Ish on this issue when rendering decisions regarding electricity. Part C, makeh b'patish, completing or finishing a process, completing the appliance. Some authorities believe that causing an electrical appliance to work is a biblical violation of makeh b'patish, literally the final blow of the hammer, but generally understood to mean the final act in finishing any product and making it useful. These authorities, so the Rambam, Hilchot Shabbat 23:4. That would be the reference there to look up. Some of these authorities cite as precedent those who prohibited winding a watch for this reason. Purely by analogy, these authorities argue that since an electrical appliance is useless before electricity is added to it, the introduction of electrical current causes it to become a useful piece of equipment and is therefore prohibited because of makeh b'patish, the final hammer blow, right? Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach in Minchat Shlomo, pages 69 to 73, and Rabbi Yaakov Bresh Helkat Yaakov 153 strongly disagree. They argue that since an appliance is designed to be frequently turned on and off, that action cannot be categorized as makeh b'patish. Moreover, they state that it is accepted that an action is considered to be makeh b'patish only when that final act is permanent or involves great effort. But since one does not ordinarily intend to turn on an appliance permanently, and since turning on an appliance does not involve great effort, this action cannot be considered as violating makeh b'patish. The majority of authorities agree that makeh b'patish cannot be the source of the prohibition to turn on electrical appliances. And Part D, sparks. The fourth reason advanced to prohibit turning on appliances during Shabbat is that of the mechanical switching on or off an electrical circuit generates sparks. Running a motor powered by direct current as opposed to alternating current must generate sparks. But there are different types of motors now that actually, some of this stuff is it's almost obsolete. So that's let's see. Sorry. As a general rule, the creation of sparks is forbidden under the rubric of the rabbinic prohibition against producing sparks from wood or stones. Numerous authorities maintain that an electrical appliance that generates sparks is thus prohibited. Some authorities believe that the creation of such sparks involves a biblical prohibition of the creation of fire, mavir. The Chazon Ish, however, asserts that it is merely a rabbinic prohibition of extracting fire from wood and stones. So, a number of factors, however, indicate this prohibition is inapplicable to the sparks created by turning mechanical switches on or off. First, these sparks are created unintentionally, dvar she'eno mitkaven, and no prohibition exists when there is no intention to perform an action on Shabbat, and that action might not occur. The second, since these sparks are so small that one cannot detect any heat when touching them, and typically they are not visible, it is possible that these sparks should not be considered fire. Some authorities believe that the creation of such sparks involves a biblical prohibition of... Okay, I read that one. I'm sorry. Creation of these sparks is dependent on many factors, including voltage and humidity. Rabbi Auerbach insists that even were the creation of these sparks to be inevitable, they would not constitute a halachic problem, since one derives no benefit from this act. Some authorities permit this act. Even those who are stringent in this matter generally would rule leniently in this particular instance because of three considerations. First, the prohibition to create sparks is merely rabbinic, not biblical. Second, this is not the usual manner, creating sparks, and the severity of prohibition is significantly diminished when performing in an unusual manner. Third, the severity of the action is reduced even further because it is a destructive act. And since these sparks in time damage the points of contact in the circuit, a precedent to be lenient in such circumstances. Okay. So it says, second, since these sparks are so small that one cannot detect any heat when touching them, typically they are not visible. It is possible these sparks should not be considered fire. Additionally, the advent of solid-state technology, so that's like, so instead of switches and stuff like that, there's electrical devices where, you have, it's like a redirection of current. It's almost like a, I don't know I don't know how to describe it, but that current is always flowing, but whenever a certain circuit has a certain threshold level of voltage, or there's maybe some other stuff that you could design it to, that it actually causes, it's almost like a gate to open up. But it's not exactly a gate. It's actually, just think of a dam, and like the dam holds back water at a certain point. But if the level gets too high, it's just going to flow over. So instead of it being like a valve like that, it's literally like, it's like a threshold level. So the water goes up, and then all of a sudden it starts going over the dam. So the same thing with the electricity. So that's kind of like what solid state is that it's always on. It's just a matter of where the levels are. The levels fluctuate, and that's how the circuit functions. So that's solid state technology. And arcless switches frequently makes this issue technologically mute. Thus, Rabbi Auerbach states practically, la halacha, that there isn't even a rabbinic prohibition in the unintentional creation of sparks. So, and then section E, it says additional fuel consumption. So another possible problem is raised by the author of Chashmal or Halacha 2.6. He writes that completing a circuit and causing a current flow sometimes causes additional fuel to be consumed by the power station as a result of the increased need for electricity. Causing additional fuel to be consumed perhaps is to be considered in the category of burning, which is forbidden on a biblical level. Thus, it might be prohibited to draw increased current on Shabbat. Okay, this would really depend on what type of electricity is being used in your area, because you have solar now, you have wind, you have like hydro, so like from dams and stuff like that. You have nuclear, we had coal plants, a lot of those, some of that stuff got shut down, but that would apply less to less today than it did in the past. So, we produce an overabundance of electricity at our power stations anyway, and we sell it to other countries or other locales. So that's a difficult one to deal with. So Rabbi Auerbach quoted, he disagreed. First, one is only indirectly causing increased fuel consumption, grama. More significantly, greater fuel consumption is not inevitable or even likely when one turns on one appliance, because statistically it is likely that at that very moment someone else has turned off an electrical appliance, thereby elimination of the need of increased electrical output. Finally, outside Israel, the power plants are operated by Gentiles if they are not fully automated, and hence prohibition would only be in directing a non-Jew to violate the Sabbath, which is only a rabbinic prohibition. I think today all these systems are automated. There's nobody is, if it's nuclear, it's 100% automated. I think even with coal-powered plants, it was probably pretty automated. You don't have people throwing shovels of coal into a furnace to heat it up for a new generator. So, but it still is a point, and that is actually a valid point. Especially for within Israel. So, but that's obviously, it has nothing to do with like if it's solar, right? If it's wind, that nobody's turning on or off, when the wind, right? And then last here it says section F, heating a wire or filament. So one other possible prohibition is raised by the Chazon Ish. He states that when the current passing through a wire raises the wire's temperature above the temperature at which a human hand pulls away because of the heat, Yad Saledid Bo. So this is like, so something is too hot, like it's considered cooking if whenever you touch it, you like instinctively pull your hand away. And this would be at like normal conditions, not like if you came in from outside and it was like, negative 10 degrees outside, because your hand is like going to be like, whoa, like the temperature differential is like massive at that point. But like if you have got frostbite or something, but like if just normal ambient, like if you have, are you cooking water for tea, like in your hot water pot, like how hot is it? If you get burnt by it, are you gonna pull your hand away? Is there that instinctive pulling your hand away? And like a child is not really a good use for this, because like children have very thin skin, so that, and they have different thresholds and tolerances. So this isn't like something to test a child with, but A temperature between 110 and 170 degrees Fahrenheit is considered that threshold. For a complete discussion of Yad Seledet Bo for the purposes of Shabbat, see Rabbi Eider Halachot of Shabbat. So let's see. So again, he states that when the current passing through the wires raises the wire's temperatures above the temperature which a human hand pulls away because of the heat, Yad Seledet Bo, it is considered to be an act of cooking, bishul, and thus is prohibited. The Chazon Ish states that this cooking is prohibited even though the person who turns on the appliance is unaware that it is occurring and does not intend that there be any cooking. Okay, Rabbi Auerbach disagrees and states that a metal wire can only be cooked when one intends to soften or temper the metal and it glows. Although the wire is slightly softened, once the electricity is extinguished, the wire immediately returns to its original state. In addition, one who turns on an appliance has no intention to soften the wires, hence this action cannot be defined as cooking. So the Chazon Ish says that it doesn't matter if you intend. Rabbi Auerbach says, it doesn't. Sorry, the Chazon Ish says it does not matter if you intend to do it or not. But but Rabbi Auerbach says that it does matter. Intention matters in a case like that, from the perspective of halacha. So, of course, if the filament were to glow sufficiently hot that the metal visibly glowed, all would concede that to be prohibited for the reasons explained in part 1. Okay. And now, additionally, in the last 20 years, solid-state technology has become dominant, and fewer appliances have wires that are heated, vacuum tubes, thus making this argument factually obsolete. So, yeah, we really don't have hot circuits and stuff like that anymore. There's something that might actually get hot like that is like regulators and stuff. That's a good question, but they have heat sinks, and that's something you don't see. That's like going to be under the hood, right? So electrical appliances permitted. Rabbi Auerbach, after rejecting all the potential sources discussed above for prohibiting the use of electricity when no light or heat is generated, concludes that, at least in theory, electrical appliances use no heat or light, such as a fan, are permitted on Shabbat and Yom Tov. However, he declines actually to permit their use absent urgent need. He states, in my opinion, there is no prohibition to use electricity on Shabbat or Yom Tov, meaning for something like a fan. There is no prohibition of makeh b'patish or molid. However, that's Rabbi Auerbach, am afraid that the masses will err and turn on incandescent lights on Shabbat, and thus I do not permit electricity absent great need. This matter requires further analysis. And he says, however, the key point in my opinion is that there is no prohibition to use electricity on Shabbat unless the electricity causes a prohibited act like cooking or starting a flame. I think that this is quite interesting because I think it has implications though, because like electricity is almost a threshold for people whether they want to become secular or they want to be religious. And I think that it's sad that has been the division point, rather than saying, like your solid state phone, can work on electricity and battery power or something like that, disconnected from the power grid, whatever. But, don't watch things on Shabbat because the ads that pop up might be bad, or you have no idea what you're going to run into. Somebody could hack your phone and put bad stuff out, or because of the other things that could happen, like don't use this on Shabbat, or the same thing with TV or radio. Like radio, you don't know what's going to come across the radio. Or, like with TV, there's all kinds of crazy commercials and stuff like that. I'm sure even if you're in Israel, it's going to be that way. So like, if stuff like that was prohibited, that would be a different story. And because, obviously, if you look at this, you look at in Ezekiel, and you look at the idea of Hashmal, you also look, thunderstorms. They're full of electricity. Stuff happens. God created this stuff. Is electricity, something of the Messianic age where there's lights in all your dwellings? Or is it this massive hurdle that the final generation has to deal with? Like this massive distraction, spiritual distraction, that like, oh, everybody wants to use electricity on Shabbat, but you can't, and if you do, that you're this evil person. And I think that was not taken in consideration very seriously, because how useful is electricity in just normal every day, to the point where you can have all kinds of things programmed to happen around you. It's nearly like a messianic age, where we're even talking now about people are scared that their jobs are going to be taken away by robots and AI and everything else, and that we have all kinds of sensors. There's all kinds of sensors that could literally, master your home for the use of electricity, but we don't use it. And again, I don't use electricity on Shabbat. I don't tell my kids to. I tell them not to, but yet, we have to deal with these problems. And I think this is a halachic problem that has come down through the line. And I think a lot of it has to do with misunderstanding, because by the time that you have one technology, you have a new technology. And now we have people that, even if you come out with like a Shabbat switch or a Shabbat whatever, that, they're like, oh, I can't use it, right? Instead of being like, yeah, well, we need to take a look at this. Why don't we create more technologies where it's Shabbat friendly, instead of, like, why do we still have a problem with this? Why don't we embrace technology as much as, but we don't. We shut it down. At least the more Haredi world attempts to shut it down. Unfortunately, like I say, this is almost like a dividing point for like the secular and the observant. And you have, people go to a more progressive form of Judaism if they still want to maintain their connection to maybe some sort of connection to Judaism. And then, they're exposed to all kinds of ideas that are pretty bizarre anymore. So, continuing. So Rabbi Auerbach additionally states that since the tradition forbids the use of electricity, and this tradition received near unanimous approval from rabbinic authorities in the normal course of events, observant Jews should accept this tradition. I think it was accepted erroneously, but yeah, even though he feels it is based on incorrect premises, and operate under the presumption that the use of electricity without light or heat is a violation of rabbinic origin based on Molid. Only in the case of urgent need does he allow one to rely on this opinion, that electricity is permitted where no heat or light is generated. So in case of urgent need. So that means, like, again, if you're a business owner and you have like some sort of process that runs, that you have to have it go, like sometimes there's processes that you can't stop that have to go for days. Like here's a very good example. Temperature conditioning of products. You have to write a environmental profile for an environmental chamber that runs for like 30 days or maybe even longer. Like at least in some cases days, but it could be like a 30-day thing. So, if that system is running, is that a prohibition to let that continue? And you also have to understand, okay, so what are the complications if something goes wrong with that system on Shabbat? Are you allowed to interfere with it? So those are things that you have to deal with ahead of time. So some people would say, just don't worry, like you don't want to worry about that type of, you don't want to be in that type of business. So just hire some goyish company to take care of it. But not necessarily. I mean, this stuff happens. There's 100 things that you could think of that operate that way. But anyway, continuing. In cases of urgent need, it is possible to accept Rabbi Shmelkis' ruling that electricity is prohibited as a form of creating something new, Molid, as correct, and perhaps still use electrical appliances. For example, in a recent work, Sha'alot Uteshuvot Marosh Zorim, page 501 to 509, Rabbi Shmuel David was asked by kibbutz members if it was permitted to use a telephone on Shabbat to call a veterinarian for advice on a mysterious plague that had struck the chicken coop. This plague was so devastating that it would destroy nearly all the animals if professional help were not received. Furthermore, these chickens were a significant source of financial support to the kibbutz. Rabbi David ruled that it was permitted to use the telephone if it was used in an unusual manner. He reasoned that in all likelihood, Rabbi Auerbach is correct and no prohibition is violated. And even if the Beit Yitzchak is correct, in cases of great need, perhaps even great financial need, and certainly physical need, since this case involved suffering to living creatures, Tsa'ar Balei Chaim, rabbinic prohibitions, when done in an unusual manner, may be violated. So too, when one is forced to choose between prohibited actions, it is appropriate to realize that the consensus is that electricity without light and heat is a rabbinic and not a biblical violation. For example, if one has to bring a person to the hospital on Shabbat, it is unquestionably preferable to call a taxi for a Gentile driver by telephone, which most consider only a rabbinic violation, than to drive there oneself, which is unquestionably a biblical violation because of the fire in the automobile and inside the engine. If the few minutes differential in time are irrelevant. That would be the key point there. So H, turning off appliances. While tradition is well established that one does not turn off appliances on Shabbat, the reasons for this prohibition are unclear. Of the six reasons advanced above to prohibit turning on electrical appliances, the inverse of three of them is directly applicable to turning off appliances. These three reasons are: just as turning on a circuit is prohibited because it's a form of building, boneh, turning off a circuit is prohibited because of the biblical prohibition of destroying, so soter. But that's only if you hold that building, turning on a circuit is building, right? This is only if you hold that initial case. So number two, if turning off a circuit, just like turning on a circuit, causes sparks to kindle, which is prohibited because of lighting a flame. So, and then section 3, if removal of heat from a currently hot metal filament is rabbinically prohibited either because of extinguishing or because of a special prohibition of taking a cooking item off the stove. The viability of each of these reasons in the context of prohibiting turning off an appliance is closely connected to its correctness in prohibiting turning on such appliances. For example, if turning on an electrical appliance is actually building, boneh, then it's logical to maintain that turning off an appliance violates the complementary biblical prohibition to destroy. On the other hand, if for the reasons explained above, boneh, or building, is inapplicable, so too is soter. So it is also worthy noting that the tradition in observant houses is typically to refrain, absent need, even from practices that are apparently permissible, according to all written discussion on this issue. For example, these authors are aware of no authority who prohibits one to reduce current flow without turning off a solid-state appliance on Shabbat. Yet it is clear that the tradition is not normally to engage in such conduct on Shabbat. So summary of this section 2, is the reason advanced to prohibit the use of electricity on Shabbat when no light or heat is generated are quite diverse. They range from the biblical prohibition of building to the rabbinic prohibition to create something new, or to tradition without any precise basis in the laws of Shabbat. Whatever the basis, accepted practice generally prohibits the use of electricity on Shabbat, even when no light or heat is generated. So I'm going to stop here and we'll tackle section 3 in a different video.